What's good, y'all? Back with another reaction video again. Here with Thomas Sowell. Thomas Sowell. I know some of y'all really love Thomas Sowell. I like some of his opinions, some of them I don't. If y'all watch my videos, y'all know. I'm gonna give y'all an honest reaction on Thomas Sowell though. See what I think. But he's about to do, this is what they don't teach you about colonization, alright? Alright, so let's go. Let's just hop right into it, man. Y'all already know to subscribe, all that stuff. I ain't even gotta tell y'all to keep doing that. You know what I'm saying? I open the floor for this. If you like me, stay. Don't like me, ain't gotta be here. Cool with either one. And drink your water. Drink your water, it helps. It helps your life. Alright, let's hop right into it. Let's go. Let's go.
Thomas Sowell is one of the greatest philosophers of our time, yet he isn't even mentioned among the 100 most influential African Americans in Ebony magazine. To help more people learn about him, please consider liking this video and subscribing. To get useful materials about Dr. Thomas Sowell, please visit the website. Thank you, and let's begin.
When you link wealth creation to the acquisition of skills and the employment of skills in a disciplined way, and also in a frugal way in terms of lifestyles, but others would attribute the generation of poverty, the opposite of wealth, to colonialism, imperialism, exploitation, economic exploitation. How do you handle those arguments?
Well, insofar as those arguments are meant seriously, you can simply look at evidence. Insofar as they're purely political arguments, they're saying what people want to hear. Obviously, there are people who would much rather hear that than to hear the other, because if you think that's the problem, then there's not only a quicker solution, but there's a more emotionally and morally satisfying solution. Namely, you fight against the exploiters and so on. If you look at the third world, for example, those parts of the third world where the imperialist powers have come in have typically been the more advanced parts of it. They've been the most prosperous ones. Even if they weren't prosperous before they got there, they became the more prosperous parts. Those parts of the third world that the imperialists have never touched are, almost without exception, the very poorest places on this earth.
So you don't find any explanation for poverty and colonialism? The reverse, perhaps?
No.
I need y'all to go look this dude up. His name is Benoni. Benoni is the person. Benoni is where probably Thomas Sowell gets his mindset from, right? Benoni believed that certain areas that were colonized, when they were colonized, they developed better because they were colonized. The people that came in gave them so much more, right? I need you to look up Benoni, and then I need you to look up another guy. His name is Francis Fanon, right? Francis Fanon was a psychiatrist, and he studied colonization and the effects of colonization on the mind, and he challenged Sigmund Freud, right? He had a battle with how Sigmund Freud viewed things, because he thought that Sigmund Freud never was able to do any of his analysis from the perspective of somebody who was colonized, right? Anyways, well, if you look up Francis Fanon disagrees with him, and I agree somewhat with Francis Fanon, a little bit with Benoni too, but I agree with Francis Fanon more on the fact that I don't think that colonization helped any of those regions. I think it made them worse, because prior to colonization, they were happy the way they were. Everybody who was colonized was happier the way they were before colonizers came over. The rest of the world developed, and then if you really think about it, every area of the globe, in a sense, was affected by colonization. So it wasn't just the areas that people went into, murdered, slaughtered people. And sometimes they didn't do that. Sometimes, they came in with Bibles and, crusades, you know what I'm saying? Forced that on the population, all kind of stuff like that. I don't ever think actually any area that was colonized peacefully. But anyways, the areas that weren't colonized, right? The reason why, they are the lesser developed areas, I feel like, and this is just my personal opinion, this is just his personal opinion, I feel like the reason why they're the lesser developed is because the rest of the world now won't help those regions, right? Won't help those regions. But the areas that were colonized, I still don't think that those areas were doing good either, because most of the areas like that are poverty-stricken areas, And most of the people that are in poverty, people blame for the crime, all kind of stuff like that. So there's so many things I could say about this. I could go so many different directions. A part of me agrees, again, like I said already, a part of me agrees with what he's saying, and a part of me agrees with what Francis Fanon was saying, that colonization was a terrible thing, and it screwed up the world. And had colonizers stayed in their regions, the world still would have been fine, still would have developed. Egypt was a developing nation, Kush was a developing nation, Ethiopia was a developing nation. All these areas were invaded, and at a period of time, these were some of the most developed places. But through an extensive amount of, like, for example, there's a good book on this called Destruction of a Black Civilization by Chancellor Williams. And through those colonized methods, it destroyed the regions, you know? In my opinion, it underdeveloped them almost in a way. And yeah, but that's really that. But let's keep going.
Oh, absolutely. That when the Romans, for example, invaded the British Isles, they conquered the southern part of Britain, but they never conquered Scotland. And for centuries thereafter, perhaps for 1,000 years thereafter, Scotland was far behind England in economic and cultural development, because England had the advantage of tying into the whole Roman civilization, and everything that it had created, to some extent, percolated down through the British. That doesn't mean the British were happy with the Romans being there. You know, 1,000 years later, Churchill could say, we owe London to Rome, but that's 1,000 years later, and Churchill didn't have to go through what those people went through. So I'm not saying this is good for the people who were there, but in the longer run, of course, England became what it was because the Romans came, and Scotland finally developed only after England conquered Scotland, and then the culture that developed in England then could spread into Scotland as well.
Well, does this suggest that?
Yeah, like he right. I'm back and forth on this because generation after generation, Haitians, the Caribbean, most of the Caribbean island people, African Americans, Africans, most of the areas that were colonized, right? How can you say it's developed? Like it's. I don't think you could call most of those areas developed. But then again, there are places in Africa with cities. You know, Ethiopia has a city. Rwanda has a city. Ghana has a city. Many places in Africa have cities, and a lot of those areas were colonized by a lot of regions. So maybe that is the reason why they have the cities. I don't know. I'm back and forth on this. It's good. This is really good. I like this one. Thomas Sowell. Yeah, I like this one. Okay.
And that in addressing poverty in today's world, there ought to be a latter-day reincarnation of imperialism or colonialism in some form.
No, because I think politically it's impossible. I hear from various parts of some independent nations, they say that they were better off under colonialism and so on. That isn't in the cards. The people who are in the imperialist nations don't want to take on that.
But some would say that there is the functional equivalent of that in the operation of the multinational corporation today. Do you see that, the operation of the multinational corporation, as help or hindrance to the generation of wealth in developing countries?
Well, in those countries, the multinational corporations very often not only pay more money than the local industry pays, but it brings in skills that don't exist and creates industries that never were there before. To that extent, I think they are a source of a transmission of international human capital. To that extent, yes.
Now, this excerpt is taken from the book Intellectuals and Race by Dr. Thomas Sowell. In addition to the inherent geographic advantages that Western Europe has had over Eastern Europe, for example, more navigable waterways leading to the open seas, with Western European rivers and harbours not being frozen over, as often or as long in winter as rivers and harbours in Eastern Europe, due to the warming effect of the Gulf Stream on Western Europe. Another major historic advantage growing out of geography is that Western Europe was more readily accessible to invasion by Roman conquerors. Despite the ruthless slaughters in those conquests and the subsequent brutal oppressions by the Roman overlords, among the lasting advantages which the Roman conquests brought to Western Europe were Roman letters, so that Western European languages had written versions centuries before the languages of Eastern Europe did. To the enormous advantages of literacy, as such, Western Europeans had the further advantage of a far greater accumulation of written knowledge in their languages, even after the languages of Eastern Europe began to develop written versions, but still had not yet caught up with the centuries-long accumulations of knowledge written in Western European languages. Literacy was not the only thing that moved from west to east in Europe. So did coins, printing presses, castles,
Is he... Oh, no, okay. Maybe I'm thinking it's wrong. Y'all correct me in the comments if I'm wrong on this. But is he saying that writing and language and developed from Western Europe and was passed to the East? 'Cause that's not what happened at all. That is not what happened at all. That's not what happened at all. What Thomas Sowell was getting at is Thomas Sowell was basically saying that the people that came over were more developed when it came to technology and commerce and things like that, and how to build those kind of things. But I do think, and this is proven, you can research this, that many people that came over to certain regions, like for example Alexander the Great, when he came to Egypt, he fell in love with the culture. He fell in love with the language, the writing, like the monuments, the many things that Africans had built. And again, Egypt is a debatable thing, because I know like many cultures have came into Egypt and it had many invasions and things like that. But you can definitely relate. Some of the Nubian culture was most of the Nubian culture was Egyptian. So the Nubians and the Egyptians are damn near one and the same. I mean, I don't care what anybody say. That's just the reality of it. That's what I've always found. But I mean, okay, I'm gonna keep listening, because I may have missed that, but I don't know if that's what he said. I may have missed that, but let's keep going. I might have missed that.
Paved streets, and vaccinations, among other economic and social advances. But all of this took time, sometimes centuries. Moreover, people from Western Europe, Germans, Jews and others, were often a majority of the population in Eastern European cities in earlier centuries, while Slavs remained a huge majority in the surrounding countrysides. For example, before 1312 the official records of the city of Krakow were kept in German, and the transition, at that point, was to Latin. Only decades later did Poles become a majority of the population in Krakow. The towns of medieval East Central Europe were often cultural enclaves of foreigners, again, mostly Germans, but with many Jews as well, and, in the Balkans, Greeks and Armenians, joined in later centuries by Turks. In short, there has been for centuries, not only a disparity between the opportunities and advances in the two halves of Europe, but great disparities within Eastern Europe itself, between the indigenous peoples of the region and the transplanted Western Europeans living in Eastern Europe, the Baltic and the Balkans. Neither genes nor discrimination are necessary to explain this situation, though some intellectuals and politicians have chosen to claim that the differences have been due to race, and others have chosen to blame social injustices. Many other racial and other groups in many other parts of the world have likewise ended up with large disparities in opportunities and achievements, for reasons that range across a wide spectrum and cannot be reduced to genes or injustices. Thank you for watching this presentation to the end. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Yeah, like, share, subscribe to this video. That was pretty good. I like that. Yeah, so basically he's saying that it's not all about race. Basically, in the sense that it doesn't really have anything to fully do with race. I totally disagree with that. Like, it does. There's a huge part of it that has to do with race. It's just not all about race. And I know a lot of intellectuals try to make it seem like that, but it does have a lot to do with race. It does. It does have a lot to do with race. I'm gonna get that book, because I'm actually interested in what Thomas Sowell said in that book, because that sounds pretty good. I mean, I don't think I read no, I think I read that one. It might have been either that one or one of his other books I read, where I was like, oh, this is pretty good. I like his dive into it. I know why he's not I don't know why he's not revered, not known amongst a lot of the black community, because when I talk to people in the black community about Thomas Sowell, they're like, who the hell is that? But I think Thomas Sowell's writings are definitely something that needs to be pushed more, because I like his writing. I disagree with some of the things he says. I agree with some of the things he says. But we're entitled to think whatever we want. All right, y'all. Y'all know what to do. I'm out.